In this video, we're going to take a look at a green ink by Platinum Green. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so you can skip around, but if you've got the time, it really does help me out if you check out the entire video. Also, down in the description is the link to the green ink playlist, so if you wanted to see more of them, you can find that there. I'm an ink guy, and let's get into the first writing sample done on 90 GSM Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, spread, halo sheen. We get decent shading in the stub. Very nice shading going on in the extra fine. A very nice shading in the medium. The extra fine is certainly lighter than the stub, and the medium's only a little bit darker than the extra fine. Still lighter than the stub. Extra fine took 12 seconds to dry, while the medium took 17. The scrubby for both does show a little color variation, shows up much better in the writing, and the smear test you probably could recover if you smeared while you were writing. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a medium, and a Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Then an Airmail Regal was inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. The next writing sample is done on 52 GSM Tomoe River. No bleeding, but some ghosting. It is a very thin paper. We have no feather, spread, halo sheen. There is some shading showing through into the stub. Definitely getting shading in the extra fine. Even seeing shading in the medium on this paper that for me doesn't always show a ton of shading. The extra fine slightly lighter than the stub, while the medium is about the same tone as the stub. Extra fine took 15 seconds to dry and the medium took 23. Scrubby for both, show a tiny bit of color variation, and it's definitely in the writing. And the smear test you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down and then it's put in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is very interesting, this super bright yellow at the bottom, and then this very nice green across the top. Now, the one on the right is let dry for 10 minutes, and that yellow is still very much staying towards the bottom and moving up to this nice darker green that gathers and gets super dark at the top. But I'm not expecting any resistance here. The next writing sample is done on 80 GSM Rhodia dot pad. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade in the stub, some shade in the extra fine. I'm going to say there's some shade in the medium, more in the idea that there's some lighter areas that show up, but otherwise not really a lot in the medium. The medium's the same tone as the stub, while the extra fine's lighter than the stub or the medium. Extra fine took 12 seconds to dry and the medium took 18. Scrubby for both. Scrubby, the extra fine shows some color variation. The medium shows a tiny bit, which is about how it worked out. And the smear test you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink could be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it handles itself quite a bit better than I was really expecting. We see a little bit of reactivating and moving, but everything there is very clear to read. Water is lifting much of this ink. It just starts to show a little bit of the white of the paper coming through. That's probably the reason it only took water to get it out of my pen. Pen flush does everything that water does and nothing more. Now, the 1/3 bleach solution, you're not going to need it, but it destroys it. The next writing sample is done on white lines paper. Now, we do get some bleed spots. None of these bleed spots on circling touched the next page. I do think that the amount of these bleed spots for me would stop me from using the back of the page, but I don't know that it stops most people. We have no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade. Extra fine's lighter than the stub, while the medium's the same tone as the stub. I'm just now seeing it, so I'm going to back up and say actually the stub has a tiny bit of feathering when you look at the word platinum. But it's really tiny. It's small enough that I didn't see it the second and third time. but only looking back, so not so shabby. The extra fine took 4 seconds to dry and a medium took 6. Scrubby for both show a tiny bit of color variation, but we're not getting it in the writing, and a smear test you could probably recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average viscosity was 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Platinum's green has a viscosity of 1.38, meaning this is a pretty darn wet ink. If you're interested in how the viscosity tests and all of that stuff's done, then down in the description is a link to that video. The next writing sample is done on Strathmore writing paper. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, spread, halo sheen. We get, I'm going to say there is shading in the stub in that there's a few really dark spots. There is definitely shading going on in the extra fine, and look at lazy, look at jumps, look at over. So there is some shading going on in the medium. Now the medium's about the same tone as the stub, while the extra fine's a little bit lighter. Extra fine took 6 seconds to dry and the medium took 9. Scrubby for both do show some color variation, but it shows more here than we actually get. And a smear test you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average dry time was 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Platinum green has an average dry time of 16 seconds, so it's normal. The last writing sample is done on P. Berger paper. No bleeding through and touching the next page, but an extreme amount of ghosting because of how deep the ink is getting into the paper. So it doesn't corrupt the next page, but you can't use the back of this page. We get a little bit of feathering on this stub. No feathering on the extra fine, a tiny bit of feathering on the medium. None of that's going to be really a problem. The medium looks like it spreads to a little more than a medium, but not quite a broad. The extra fine doesn't have spread, neither does the stub. No halo sheen, no shade in the stub. It looks like there's a few shade spots occurring in the extra fine. A few darker spots are occurring in the medium. The extra fine took 2 seconds to dry while the medium took 4. Scrubby for both aren't showing a lot for color variation, but there is some spotting of color in the writing. And a smear test you could probably recover if you smeared while you were writing. Instead of finding inks that look like platinum green, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I like putting purples with greens, so I decided on a purple from Levenger, their Amethyst. Now, if you'd prefer a different complement color, then down in the description are links to those playlists. So what do I think of platinum green? When this shades, it looks good, but it doesn't shade very often. As a green, it is a bright, nice tone, but still I prefer more shading in my green inks. I just can't see a bottle of this in my future, although it is a fairly decent ink. So what nib and pen are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? In order to increase the shading of this ink, instead of worrying about the nib, we're going to worry about the flow. A dry pen is going to help to actually let this ink shade more, regardless of what nib size you use, but I think it would show off best in a dry broad or dry stub. I hope you got something out of this video, and in the next video, we're going to take a look at Diamine's Pink Glitz.